that demands progress and rejects passivity. In this audiobook, we will explore how to develop that mindset with structure and depth. We will examine how high achievers think, how they make decisions, how they use time, how they adapt, and how they build resilience. You will notice that the themes are simple, but they are not easy, and that distinction is precisely why so few people cross the threshold from desire to mastery. This is not an audiobook about shortcuts, nor is it a celebration of motivation for its own sake. It is a guide to building the inner architecture that makes success inevitable over time. If you are ready to challenge your assumptions, raise your standards, and commit to personal evolution, then you are in the right place. Let's begin. Chapter 1. Decide who you will become. Before anything meaningful can change in your life, you have to decide who you intend to become. Not what you want, not what you wish, but who you will become. That sounds simple, almost too simple, but most people never make that decision. They drift, they react, they adapt to circumstances instead of shaping them. And without a clear chosen identity, their actions have no consistent direction. When high achievers look at their future, they don't merely hope for improvement. They define the kind of person capable of producing that improvement. They begin with identity instead of outcomes. Instead of saying, "I want to earn more," they say, "I will become the kind of person who creates value." Instead of saying, "I want to get in shape," they say, "I will become the kind of person who treats their health as a priority." These decisions act as internal instructions. They guide behavior long after motivation fades. Identity shapes standards, and standards shape habits. Once you decide who you will be, your brain begins eliminating options that don't fit that identity. If you truly decide to be disciplined, then skipping work becomes out of character. If you decide to be a learner, then boredom becomes a signal to study instead of scroll. And if you decide to be a builder, then excuses feel unnatural. Identity gives you a lens that filters the world. But here's the difficult truth. Deciding who to become requires closing the door on other versions of yourself. That is why most people never do it. They want improvement without sacrifice. They want growth without discomfort. They want a new future, while keeping the same habits, the same environment, and the same tendencies. But becoming someone new means disappointing who you used to be. It means outgrowing behaviors that were once comforting. It means refusing to negotiate with the part of you that prefers convenience. Take a moment and think about how much of your identity has been accidental. Maybe shaped by parents, maybe by culture, maybe by friends, maybe by fear. Identity that is handed to you rarely fits you. Identity chosen by you, however, is empowering. It is the beginning of agency. Deciding who you will become is not a one-time declaration. It is a commitment you renew through action. You don't become disciplined by saying it once. You become disciplined by choosing it repeatedly, especially when it's inconvenient. You don't become intentional by writing goals. You become intentional by waking up each day and acting like a person who has a direction. Identity is not what you announce, it's what you prove. So pause and ask yourself the simplest but most important question: who am I in the process of becoming? If the answer doesn't excite you or stretch you, then you haven't decided yet. And if you haven't decided, life will decide for you. The moment you choose intentionally is the moment you begin to lead your own future. Chapter 2. Think like an architect, not a wanderer. Every structure you have ever admired began as a drawing. Before a single brick was laid, before a foundation was poured, someone sat down and thought with intention. They asked, "What will this become? How will it function? How should it look?" Nothing meaningful in the physical world appears without first existing in the mental world. High achievers understand this principle instinctively. They think like architects. They design their direction. They plan their moves. They do not wander and hope success bumps into them along the way. A wanderer, on the other hand, relies on feeling, luck, or convenience. They move without clarity. They try something for a while, get distracted, and then switch to something else. They waste not only time but momentum. Wandering feels active because you're always doing something, but activity without direction is just refined avoidance. It is effort with no architecture, and effort without architecture rarely compounds. To think like an architect means to operate with intention. It means you recognize that life has structure, and that outcomes are not random. When you see someone living with purpose, accomplishing meaningful goals, or building something exceptional, you are not witnessing luck. You are witnessing planning. You are seeing the results of someone who took time to ask deeper questions. Where am I headed? Why does it matter? What are the steps in between? What must be eliminated? What must be added? The average person resists this type of thinking because planning confronts reality. It reveals gaps, weaknesses, and contradictions. When you plan your future, you are forced to see what you've been ignoring. That discomfort alone is enough to make most people drift instead. Drifting feels easier because it demands nothing. No clarity, no commitment, no accountability. But drifting has a cost. It guarantees mediocrity. You cannot drift into excellence. The architect mindset begins with vision, not fantasy, not vague dreams, but a vision anchored to reality. Vision answers the question, what am I building? If you do not know the answer, everything else becomes guesswork. Vision pulls you forward. When challenges arise, vision gives you a reason to endure. Without vision, discomfort becomes discouraging. With vision, discomfort becomes necessary. The next step is structure. High achievers break their vision into components, skills to learn, systems to build, daily actions to repeat. They turn the abstract into the concrete. They break years into quarters, quarters into months, months into weeks, weeks into days. Structure removes overwhelm. It tells you what to do next and eliminates friction. You are no longer reacting, you are executing. Then comes sequencing. An architect does not install windows before walls. There is an order to the build. Many people fail not because they lack ambition, but because they attempt everything at once. They chase 10 priorities and execute none. High achievers choose sequencing instead of chaos. They ask what must come first, which skill unlocks the others, what foundation needs to be built before expansion. The architect mindset also respects constraints. Constraints are not interruptions, they are part of the design. Limited time, limited resources, limited knowledge, these are not reasons to quit, but parameters to work within. A good architect doesn't complain that the land isn't perfect, they design according to the land. Likewise, a high achiever accepts constraints and asks, how do I build despite them? How do I design around them? It is also important to recognize that architecture involves revision. Plans evolve, adjustments are made. Feedback is welcomed, not feared. Wanderers interpret correction as criticism. Architects interpret correction as improvement. This difference alone determines how fast someone grows. If you cannot accept revision, you cannot achieve mastery. To think like an architect does not require extraordinary intelligence. It requires a willingness to slow down and think before acting. It requires the humility to plan and the discipline to follow through. It means choosing design over impulse, clarity over chaos, and responsibility over wandering. So ask yourself, are you building your life or merely walking through it? Are you making decisions based on a future you've designed? Or are you moving based on the path of least resistance? In every season of life, you are either the architect or the wanderer. One leads to creation, the other leads to repetition. One builds something new, The other relives the same year, over and over. The decision to design your life is one of the clearest marks of a high achiever mindset. Chapter 3. Set standards that force growth. If you want to understand the difference between average performance and high achievement, do not look first at talent, luck, or opportunity. Look at standards. Standards are the invisible lines that determine what you will tolerate from yourself. They dictate the level of effort you consider normal, the quality of work you consider acceptable, and the type of results you consider expected. Your standards create your baseline, and your baseline eventually becomes your reality. Most people assume success is built by big goals, but goals are only as strong as the standards that support them. A person can set a goal to get in shape, but if their standard is to skip workouts when they feel tired, the goal collapses. A person can set a goal to earn more, but if their standard is to avoid discomfort, the goal remains theoretical. Goals are external, standards are internal, and what is internal always wins. High achievers separate themselves not by desiring more, but by demanding more from themselves as the minimum, not the maximum. To them, excellence is not an occasion, it is a requirement. It is not something they rise to occasionally. It is something they fall to consistently. This is why a high achiever's normal day often outperforms an average person's best day. Standards create the floor, not the ceiling. Raising standards forces growth, because higher standards create friction with your old behavior. If you raise your standard for health, your old eating habits and sleep patterns become unacceptable. If you raise your standard for productivity, procrastination becomes uncomfortable. If you raise your standard for discipline, excuses lose their power. Growth is uncomfortable because it threatens familiarity. That discomfort is a sign that standards are doing their job. But here is the subtle part. Most standards are inherited, not chosen. They come from your family, your environment, your friend group, or the culture you grew up in. If everyone around you treats mediocrity as normal, you begin to see mediocrity as reasonable. If everyone around you treats excellence as expected, you begin to see excellence as standard. This is why your environment matters so much. It shapes your baseline expectations without your permission. Choosing your own standards is one of the most empowering decisions you can make. It shifts you from being shaped by the world to shaping yourself. It means you no longer match the temperature of the room. You set it. You decide the level at which you operate. And once you decide, something interesting happens. You begin to feel uneasy when your actions do not align with your standards. That tension creates accountability from the inside out. It is important to note that raising standards does not require perfection. High achievers are not flawless. They simply refuse to let flaws become habits. When they fall short, they correct quickly. When they slip, they return to their standards rather than lowering them. Most people do the opposite. When they fall short of their standards, they reduce their standards to protect their ego. They say things like, maybe this is just who I am, or maybe I was aiming too high. Lowering standards feels comforting in the moment, but dangerous in the long run. It trades potential for relief. If you want to elevate your standards, begin with specificity. A vague standard, I will try to be more consistent, has no power. A clear standard, I work on my goals for 1 hour every day, no matter how I feel, creates structure. Specific standards produce predictable behaviors, and predictable behaviors produce results. Then apply consistency. Standards matter only when they become non-negotiable. If you only uphold your standards when conditions are ideal, they are preferences, not standards. The true test of a standard is not when you are motivated. It is when you are tired, stressed, bored, or discouraged. That is when most people abandon their commitments. High achievers hold their line. Finally, allow your standards to evolve. The standard that once challenged you will one day become too small. Growth requires upgrades. What was once impressive should eventually become normal. That is not arrogance. That is progress. A life without rising standards becomes stagnant. A life with rising standards becomes expansive. Ask yourself, what do you currently consider acceptable that is holding you back? What do you allow that needs to be eliminated? And what standard, if enforced consistently, would change your trajectory? The answer to those questions will tell you more about your future than your goals ever will. Chapter 4. Make discipline your competitive advantage. If there is one trait that separates those who achieve consistently from those who merely dream, it is discipline. Not inspiration, not motivation, not talent. Discipline. Motivation is emotional, talent is unevenly distributed, and inspiration is unpredictable. Discipline, however, is a choice. It is repeatable, it is controllable, and when exercised long enough, it becomes a competitive advantage, so strong that it appears almost unfair from the outside. The world is full of people with big ambitions but weak follow-through. They start with energy, talk with enthusiasm, make plans with excitement, and then stop as soon as the effort becomes uncomfortable. Discipline is the opposite pattern. It is the act of doing what needs to be done, even when the emotional state is unfavorable. It is choosing alignment over convenience, responsibility over impulse, long-term gain over immediate relief. Discipline does not feel dramatic. It feels steady, quiet, and often uncelebrated. Yet it is the single force that turns goals into realities. One of the most surprising truths about discipline is that it becomes easier, not harder, over time. The first stage is resistance, where every step feels like a battle. The second stage is adaptation, where your brain begins to normalize the effort. The third stage is identity, where the behavior no longer feels like something you are forcing. It feels like who you are. This is why forcing yourself to begin is so valuable. The earlier repetitions prepare the mind for the shift from effort to identity. People often misunderstand discipline as self-punishment. In reality, discipline is self-respect. It is an acknowledgement of your potential and a refusal to waste it. When you set a task and follow through, you are signaling to yourself, my word matters. That small act builds internal trust. Trust grows into confidence. Confidence grows into capability. The same process works in reverse when discipline is absent. Every time you say you will do something and then do not, you send a message to yourself that your own promises are optional. That erodes confidence. It erodes belief. Eventually it erodes ambition itself. To make discipline your competitive advantage, you must adjust how you think about it. Discipline thrives on systems, not willpower. If you rely on willpower alone, you will eventually fail, because willpower fluctuates with energy, mood, stress, and circumstance. Systems, however, operate regardless of emotion. A system is simply a prepared environment that makes the desired behavior easier and the undesired behavior harder. Laying out gym clothes at night, preparing your workspace, scheduling your learning, or removing distractions are all examples of environmental systems that make discipline sustainable. Consistency is another pillar of discipline. Large efforts performed sporadically cannot outperform small efforts performed daily. This is counterintuitive to many people, because we admire dramatic displays of effort. We admire the person who works 20 hours in a crisis, but we overlook the person who works 2 hours every day for a year. Yet in the long run, steady work compounds and dramatic work burns out. Almost everything meaningful in life grows slowly at first. Discipline ensures you continue long enough to see the compounding. It is also helpful to understand that discipline does not eliminate discomfort. it changes your relationship with it. Most people avoid discomfort as if it is inherently negative. High achievers view discomfort as feedback. If something is difficult, it might mean it is valuable. If something stretches you, it might mean you are growing. Discipline teaches you that effort is not something to fear, but something to engage with. When you stop negotiating with yourself, when you stop asking whether you feel like it, you remove the barrier that keeps most people stuck at the starting line. There is also a strategic element to discipline: prioritization. You cannot be disciplined about everything, but you must be disciplined about the things that matter. This requires you to distinguish between what is urgent and what is important. Urgent tasks demand attention, but important tasks define your future. A disciplined person puts importance above urgency and consistency above speed. Finally, discipline becomes a competitive advantage because it compounds in a world addicted to shortcuts. While others look for easier paths, quicker routes, or instant gratification, the disciplined individual builds quietly, accumulates progress, and arrives at results that seem to everyone else sudden. But nothing could be further from the truth. Overnight success is simply invisible discipline over time. Ask yourself, where could discipline change your trajectory? What promise do you need to keep to yourself? And more importantly, how would your life change if discipline became your default instead of your exception? The moment you choose discipline, you choose power. Chapter 5. Train your brain to love hard things. Human nature is wired to seek comfort and avoid difficulty. This instinct once kept us alive, but in the modern world it often keeps us small. Most meaningful achievements require effort, patience, uncertainty, and delayed gratification, conditions that feel uncomfortable to the brain. This is why so many people quit when things get hard. They don't lack ability, they lack tolerance for discomfort. High achievers understand this and deliberately train themselves to approach hard things instead of retreating from them. They do not wait until something feels easy. They grow strong enough to handle what is difficult. At first glance, this idea may sound unrealistic. How do you love hard things? Isn't discomfort by definition unpleasant? Yes, but the secret lies in association. The brain doesn't respond to difficulty itself. It responds to what difficulty means. For some, difficulty means danger. For others, difficulty means progress. When you interpret challenge as a threat, your instinct is avoidance. When you interpret it as improvement, your instinct becomes engagement. High achievers have conditioned their minds to associate struggle with growth, not with failure or inadequacy. This conditioning does not happen overnight. It begins with a shift in perspective. Most people believe struggle is evidence that they are not good enough. High achievers believe struggle is evidence that they are on the edge of expansion. The same discomfort that discourages one person energizes another. This is not about pain for the sake of pain. It is about recognizing that every meaningful upgrade in life has a cost, and that cost is effort. There is a simple rule worth remembering. Anything that builds you will first test you, and anything that tests you will first make you uncomfortable. A new skill tests your patience. A new discipline tests your consistency. A new responsibility tests your capacity. Growth always demands that you operate beyond your previous limits. The question is not whether you can do hard things. The question is whether you can stay long enough in the discomfort for growth to occur. To train your brain to love hard things, start small. The mistake people make is assuming they must leap to extremes. They attempt huge changes, fail quickly, and then conclude they are not capable. But discomfort tolerance increases the same way muscles increase, through manageable stress applied consistently. If you do something slightly harder than yesterday, your capacity expands. Over time, hard things become normal. What once intimidated you becomes routine. This is how growth feels from the inside, slow at first, then obvious in hindsight. Another powerful tool is reframing. Language shapes experience. When you say, "This is hard," your brain hears a warning. When you say, "This is new," your brain hears a challenge. When you say, "This is helping me grow," your brain hears a reward. These are subtle differences, but they accumulate. People who succeed consistently are not fighting their brains, they are training them. It also helps to understand that discomfort often appears right before breakthrough. Many individuals quit at the exact moment progress is about to compound. They misinterpret resistance as a sign to stop, when in reality it is a sign they are finally engaging the part of the journey that builds skill. If you lift weights, the growth does not happen during the easy reps. It happens when the muscle begins to fail. Life works the same way. Growth hides behind resistance. There is another dimension to loving hard things: identity. When you see yourself as someone who avoids difficulty, you will retreat whenever discomfort appears. When you see yourself as someone who seeks challenge, difficulty becomes part of your character. Identity makes habits stable. If you want lasting change, your self-concept must evolve to support it. High achievers don't just do hard things, they become people who do hard things. Once that identity takes root, discipline becomes easier, and resilience becomes natural. Finally, learning to love hard things gives you an advantage in a world obsessed with convenience. As the average person becomes more addicted to ease, the gap between comfort seekers and growth seekers expands. The harder things become, the fewer competitors remain. When you train yourself to lean into difficulty, to stay longer, persist deeper, endure more intelligently, you move into a category with very little crowding. Hard things are not just obstacles, they are filters. They separate those who wish from those who earn. Ask yourself, what hard thing are you avoiding that could change your life if you stopped running from it? And more importantly, who would you become if discomfort no longer intimidated you, but instead invited you forward? Chapter 6. Stop negotiating with your excuses. Every person who wants to achieve anything worthwhile faces an internal opponent. That opponent does not live outside in circumstances or obstacles. It lives inside, in the form of excuses. Excuses are subtle and persuasive. They sound reasonable, they feel protective, and they often disguise themselves as logic. But at their core, excuses are negotiations against your own potential. They allow you to delay, avoid, minimize, or postpone the very actions that would improve your life. High achievers are not free of excuses. They have simply learned not to negotiate with them. Excuses do not arrive loudly, they arrive quietly. You're tired today, you can do it tomorrow. You don't feel ready yet, maybe wait a little longer. It's not the right time. You don't know enough. You're too old. You're too young. You should take it easy, except take it easy never produces change. Tomorrow never arrives. And not the right time becomes a lifetime of deferred potential. The brain invents excuses, not because it wants failure, but because it wants comfort. The brain prioritizes safety, even when safety leads to stagnation. What makes excuses powerful is that they contain fragments of truth. You may genuinely feel tired. You may genuinely feel uncertain. You may genuinely lack information. But high achievers understand that truth is not a sufficient reason to delay. If you wait for perfect conditions, you will never begin. The world does not reward you for waiting until everything feels convenient. It rewards you for acting despite inconvenience. Excuses are also attractive because they preserve ego. If you convince yourself that you could have succeeded, if you tried, you never have to confront the possibility of failing when you do try. This is one of the most common traps people fall into. They protect their ego by avoiding commitment. They would rather fantasize about what they could achieve than discover the limits of what they actually can achieve. But ego protection has a cost. It prevents growth. And where there is no growth, there can be no achievement. To stop negotiating with excuses, you must first become aware of how negotiation begins. It begins with small internal conversations. You tell yourself you'll work out later, you'll focus after lunch, you'll write when you feel inspired. Each time you negotiate, you reinforce the belief that effort is optional. Over time, this belief becomes part of your identity. You begin to see yourself as someone who puts things off, someone who means well but doesn't execute. Identity always follows behavior. The solution is not to eliminate excuses. They will always exist. The solution is to stop engaging with them. The moment you entertain a negotiation with an excuse, you have already lost time and power. High achievers use a simple rule: if it's important, it gets done. No negotiation. They do not debate with feelings. They follow commitments. When the brain says, "You're tired," they say, "I know, and we're still doing it." When the brain says, "You don't feel like it," they say, "Feelings don't make decisions here." Another way to defeat excuses is through pre-commitment. Pre-commitment means you decide ahead of time what will happen, instead of letting the moment decide. When you decide ahead of time, emotions have no vote. For example, if you choose the time you work, the number of pages you write, or the hours you train, the brain can complain, but it cannot negotiate. You have already made the decision with a clear mind. It is also useful to expose the cost of excuses. Every excuse has a price, even if you never notice it. The price might be time you cannot get back. It might be confidence that slowly erodes. It might be opportunities that disappear. Or it might be potential that never materializes. When you understand that excuses are not harmless, they lose their charm. They are not protecting you, they are restricting you. Finally, understand that excuses do not build a better future, they build a comfortable present. If comfort is your highest priority, your growth will always be limited. But if growth is your priority, your comfort will eventually expand. The person who stops negotiating with excuses gains something priceless: consistency. And consistency over time creates results that appear extraordinary to those still negotiating with themselves. Ask yourself, what excuse do you rely on most often, and what would change in your life if you simply stopped giving it power? Chapter 7. Learn the art of relentless focus. In a world overflowing with noise, distraction is no longer a minor inconvenience. It is a direct threat to achievement. Never in history has focus been so valuable, because never in history has it been so rare. Most people are not defeated by lack of talent, lack of ambition, or lack of opportunity. They are defeated by scattering their attention across too many trivial pursuits. They start 10 things, finish none, and wonder why momentum never builds. High achievers do not operate this way. They treat focus as a skill to master, a resource to protect, and a competitive edge to sharpen. Relentless focus begins with clarity. If you do not know what matters most, everything seems urgent. And when everything seems urgent, you give your time away to whatever shouts the loudest. High achievers reverse this. They decide what is important up front, and then they defend it against distraction. They understand that time may be equal for everyone, but attention is not. Two people can work for 8 hours and produce entirely different outcomes based on how much of that time was actually focused. But focus is not just the ability to concentrate. It is also the ability to ignore. To focus on something, you must unfocus from something else. This is uncomfortable for many people because ignoring things feels like missing out, disappointing others, or falling behind socially. Yet focus always requires trade-offs. You cannot build a meaningful life while trying to be available to every notification, every message, every invitation, and every impulse. Focus demands prioritization, and prioritization demands the courage to say no. The mind, left untrained, is restless. It jumps between tasks, thoughts, and stimuli in search of novelty. Modern technology amplifies this restlessness to an extreme. Notifications, algorithms, feeds and entertainment are designed to capture your attention, not empower it. If you drift through life without intentional design, your attention will become fragmented, and fragmented attention leads to fragmented results. This is why high achievers do not rely on willpower alone. They create systems that support focus. One of the most powerful systems is single tasking. Doing one thing at a time may sound simple, but it is revolutionary in a culture that celebrates multitasking. Multitasking does not increase productivity, it increases switching, and every switch has a cost. When the brain switches tasks, it must re-establish context, rebuild momentum, and reorient itself. Those micro-delays accumulate. A task that would take 1 hour with full focus may take 3 hours when diluted by interruptions. High achievers recognize this and organize their work in uninterrupted blocks. They give their tasks the gift of full attention. Relentless focus also requires managing your internal environment. Even if you eliminate external distractions, internal ones remain: worry, boredom, fear, and impatience. These internal distractions often arise when tasks become difficult or progress feels slow. This is where many people quit mentally and seek novelty as a form of escape. But novelty does not build skill, repetition does. Focus means staying with a task long enough for the discomfort to subside and progress to emerge. The ability to endure boredom, resist distraction, and remain engaged during the slow middle is one of the defining characteristics of performers at the top of any field. Another essential aspect of focus is sequencing. Not everything deserves attention now. High achievers understand that certain actions unlock other actions. They identify leverage points, the one habit, skill, or decision that simplifies everything else. When they focus, they are not merely working hard, they are working intelligently. Focus without sequencing can still lead to overwhelm. Focus with sequencing leads to acceleration. There is also an emotional dimension to focus: commitment. Focus is easier when you truly care about what you are doing. Most distractions gain power when you are unsure about your path. Without commitment, everything becomes negotiable, but when you are committed, alternatives lose their appeal. You are no longer tempted by every stimulus because you have chosen a direction worth defending. In a distracted society, focus becomes a superpower. It allows your efforts to compound. It transforms learning. It accelerates mastery. It reveals capabilities you never knew you had. While others are pulled in 1,000 directions, you move steadily toward one destination. And it is that steadiness, built from countless unfancy days of attention, that eventually looks extraordinary to everyone watching. Ask yourself, how much of your life is lost to distraction, and what would happen if for the first time, you gave your attention fully to the one thing that truly matters? Chapter 8. Build systems that don't rely on willpower. Most people assume success is powered by motivation. They imagine high achievers waking up energized, excited, and driven every single day. But motivation is unreliable. It fluctuates with mood, stress, and circumstance. Some days it is strong, other days it is nowhere to be found. If your progress depends on how motivated you feel, your progress will be inconsistent. High achievers know this, which is why they rely on systems instead of willpower. Systems create consistency whether motivation is present or not. A system is simply a structured way of doing something that produces a predictable outcome. Systems remove the need to decide, negotiate, or persuade yourself. They turn important behaviors into routine, and routine into results. For example, going to the gym is an action, having a workout schedule, prepared clothes, and a set time is a system. Writing when you feel inspired is an action. Writing every morning at 8 a.m. is a system. Systems take effort up front, but they pay dividends over the long term. The human brain loves efficiency. Once a behavior becomes predictable, the brain uses less energy to perform it. This is why systems are so powerful. They reduce cognitive friction. Without a system, you must constantly think about what to do, when to do it, and how to start. Thinking takes energy. Decisions take energy. Negotiations take energy. Eventually, most people run out of energy and postpone the task. Systems remove that burden. They replace spontaneous decision-making with structured execution. Another advantage of systems is that they protect you from emotional variability. On days when you feel tired, stressed, or uninspired, a system holds the line. It says, we do this at this time, in this way, regardless of how you feel about it in the moment. This is essential because growth often requires doing things you don't feel like doing. Without a system, those moments become surrender points. With a system, those moments become just another repetition. When building systems, clarity is crucial. A vague system is no system at all. For example, saying I'll exercise more has no structure. Saying I train for 45 minutes every weekday at 6 a.m. creates a framework, a routine, and a boundary. The clearer the system, the less room there is for excuses. Systems thrive on specificity. Another key is environment. Your environment either supports your systems or sabotages them. If you want to read more, but your environment is filled with screens, noise, and notifications, your system is fighting uphill. If you want to eat healthy, but your kitchen is stocked with junk food, your system is undermined from the start. High achievers design environments that make the right behaviors easier and the wrong behaviors harder. This principle is simple. Don't fight battles you can design your way out of. Systems also benefit from automation. Anytime you remove human intervention, you reduce the risk of inconsistency. Automatic savings transfers, scheduled study blocks, blocked digital distractions, and preset learning routines are all examples of automated systems that promote progress without constant effort. Automation frees cognitive bandwidth so your discipline can be used where it matters most. Another important element is measurement. A system without measurement becomes guesswork. High achievers track progress not to boast, but to understand. Data reveals patterns where you improve, where you stall, and where adjustments are needed. Measurement turns effort into learning. Without feedback, you are operating in the dark. There is also an identity component to systems. When you consistently follow systems, you start to see yourself differently. The person who trains daily no longer sees themselves as a beginner. They see themselves as an athlete. The person who reads daily begins to see themselves as a learner. Systems transform self-image through repetition. Identity built on evidence is stable. Ultimately, systems are liberating because they remove the burden of constant discipline. You only need discipline at the beginning to build the system. Once the system is in place, it carries much of the weight. This is why high achievers seem so consistent. They are not constantly fighting themselves. They built systems so they wouldn't have to. Ask yourself, in which areas of your life are you relying on willpower, and where could a system take over? The difference between wishing for improvement and achieving it is often nothing more than the presence of a system sturdy enough to guarantee progress. Chapter 9. Turn your time into a weapon. Time is the one resource granted equally to everyone, yet it produces wildly unequal outcomes. Some people achieve extraordinary results in the same 24 hours others use to merely stay busy. The difference is not the quantity of time, but the quality of its use. High achievers treat time as a strategic weapon, not merely as something to pass or fill. They understand that time can be leveraged, invested, multiplied and converted into skill, results and impact. Most people, however, treat time reactively and wonder why progress is slow. The first element of turning time into a weapon is recognizing that not all hours are equal. 1 hour of deep, focused work can outperform 10 hours of distracted effort. 1 hour spent learning can outperform 10 hours doing low-value tasks. Most people confuse movement with progress, activity with achievement, motion with advancement. The person who learns to distinguish between high-value and low-value time unlocks one of the greatest advantages in life. High achievers identify their peak cognitive hours, the hours when their brain is most capable of deep thinking, strategic planning and complex work. They schedule their most important actions during these hours and refuse to waste them on trivialities. In contrast, average performers often reserve their best hours for social media, errands or entertainment, then try to work when they are mentally drained. The order alone changes outcomes dramatically. Time management is not just about scheduling, it is about sequencing power correctly. Another dimension of using time well is elimination. You cannot weaponize time if it is fragmented by distractions. Every interruption resets concentration and steals minutes of reorientation. Modern life is full of micro-distractions, notifications, messages, alerts, feeds that fracture focus and dilute thought. High achievers defend their time by reducing the number of open loops competing for attention. They unsubscribe, mute, silence, delegate or decline. They remove clutter, because clutter, digital or physical, is time's silent enemy. Time also becomes powerful when it is invested instead of consumed. Consuming time feels comfortable, scrolling, watching, checking, refreshing. Investing time feels productive, reading, studying, training, building. The difference compounds. A person who reads for an hour a day builds a library of ideas and perspectives over the years. A person who practices for an hour a day builds mastery. Meanwhile, the person who scrolls for an hour a day builds nothing but habit. The return on invested time is one of the most reliable forms of compounding available to anyone willing to participate. Another crucial aspect is intentional pacing. High achievers do not rush for the sake of speed, nor do they waste time out of indecision. They move at a pace calibrated to the value of the objective. Some tasks require speed, others require patience, others require thought. A mature relationship with time means knowing when to accelerate, when to maintain, and when to slow down. Many people move too quickly on big decisions and too slowly on small decisions. High achievers do the opposite. Time can also be weaponized through leverage. Leverage means using time in ways that multiply results without multiplying effort. Learning a skill that makes future work easier is leverage. Automating a repetitive task is leverage. Delegating work to someone more specialized is leverage. Building an asset that produces value while you sleep is leverage. The more leverage you apply, the more your time works for you instead of against you. The final dimension is consistency. A weapon is only useful when it is used regularly. Sporadic bursts of productivity cannot compete with sustained rhythmic progress. Time rewards the persistent, not the occasional. The person who applies an hour daily will eventually outperform the person who applies 10 hours randomly. Time compounds effort in the same way. Interest compounds money, slowly at first, then overwhelmingly. Ask yourself a few questions. Where does your time go? What steals it? What multiplies it? What diminishes it? What would change if you treated every hour of your day as an investment instead of a placeholder? Time is indifferent. It does not care who uses it well or who wastes it, but it reveals its loyalty to those who take it seriously. The moment you stop merely passing time and start weaponizing it, your results will begin to separate from the crowd. Chapter 10. Become the person who finishes. The world is full of starters. People start businesses, diets, books, skills, routines, challenges, and projects with enthusiasm. But starters are not the ones who shape the world. Finishers are. Every goal worth achieving passes through a valley where initial excitement fades and resistance rises. Those who finish are not necessarily smarter, more talented, or more gifted. They are simply willing to endure the middle, the messy part, the unglamorous stretch, where progress feels slow and effort feels heavy. High achievers understand that completion is a virtue, and they treat finishing as a discipline in itself. Finishing requires a fundamental shift in mindset. Most people value beginnings. They love planning, imagining, and setting goals. These early stages feel exciting because they offer possibility without responsibility. But finishing demands responsibility. When you finish something, you face the truth of your effort. You must confront results instead of fantasies. This is one reason many people avoid finishing. They would rather preserve the illusion of potential than experience the reality of performance. Another challenge is that the beginning of any pursuit gives you energy, while the middle requires energy. The middle is where boredom, doubt, and impatience appear. It is where the process transitions from novelty to repetition. Progress slows down. Feedback becomes less obvious. Results require compounding instead of bursts. This is the phase where most people quit, not because they are incapable, but because they misinterpret slow progress as failure. High achievers know that slow progress is not failure. It is how mastery forms. To become someone who finishes, you must build a relationship with the middle. You must learn to expect resistance instead of being surprised by it. You must recognize that the path from start to finish is rarely linear. It loops, stalls, and twists. You will have days where you feel like you are moving backwards, but finishing means continuing anyway. It means refusing to let temporary frustration dictate permanent decisions. One of the most effective habits for finishing is narrowing your focus. Most unfinished projects die, not because they are impossible, but because they are competing with too many other priorities. Multitasking dilutes energy. Divided attention weakens execution. High achievers understand the importance of completion cycles. They take things step by step, task by task, project by project. They do not leave behind a trail of half-finished ambitions. They finish one, then move to the next. Another key is defining done. Many people do not finish simply because they have no clear end point. They chase perfection instead of completion, and perfection becomes the enemy of progress. Finishing does not mean flawless, it means completed to standard. Once something is completed, you can improve it. But you cannot improve what does not exist. Completion unlocks iteration. Without completion, there is only imagination. Finishing also requires a tolerance for imperfection. Every pursuit reveals flaws in your skill, knowledge, or preparation. Many people quit to avoid confronting those flaws. But flaws are not a verdict, they are feedback. They show you what to improve. High achievers see feedback as fuel. They would rather finish imperfectly and learn than quit prematurely and learn nothing. Another aspect of finishing is emotional endurance. Every pursuit has emotional cycles. There will be excitement, resistance, boredom, frustration, and satisfaction, often in that order. If you quit whenever your emotions shift, you will become someone who can only operate in ideal conditions. But achievements are built in non-ideal conditions. They are built when you do the work without the mood. Finishing also builds identity. When you finish consistently, you begin to see yourself differently. You stop being someone who tries and become someone who delivers. Identity creates momentum. The more you finish, the stronger the identity becomes. Eventually, quitting becomes out of character for you. At that point, finishing is no longer just an action, it is who you are. Becoming someone who finishes is one of the simplest ways to separate yourself from the majority. The world rewards finishers because finishers bring ideas into existence. They turn potential into reality. They close loops. They honor their promises. Ask yourself, how many things have you started? And how would your life change if you committed to becoming one of the few who finishes? Chapter 11. Learn to outlast your obstacles. When most people imagine achievement, they picture talent, intelligence, strategy, or opportunity. But one of the most underrated forces behind real success is endurance. The ability to outlast what stands in your way. Obstacles are universal. Everyone encounters them. Yet the outcomes diverge, because some people quit at the first sign of resistance, while others continue long enough for the resistance to weaken. High achievers know that most obstacles are temporary, but only visible as temporary to those who endure. Obstacles come in many forms: external, internal, logistical, financial, emotional, relational, and psychological. Some are tangible, like limited resources. Others are invisible, like self-doubt or fear. But all obstacles have one thing in common: they shrink with time and effort. People assume obstacles get bigger the longer they persist, but the opposite is often true. Confidence grows, skill grows, perspective grows, strategies improve. What once felt impossible begins to feel manageable. The problem is that most people quit before this shift has time to occur. The gap between beginning and breakthrough is often filled with silence. No applause, no external validation, no evidence that the effort will pay off. This silence is where many individuals abandon their pursuit. They mistake lack of immediate feedback for lack of progress. But progress rarely announces itself in real time. It accumulates quietly and reveals itself suddenly. Those who outlast the silent phase are the ones who eventually experience the visible phase, where breakthroughs, opportunities, and results become apparent. Every obstacle presents a decision: tolerate the discomfort and continue, or retreat to safety. Retreat offers immediate relief, but long-term regret. Continuation offers immediate difficulty but long-term fulfillment. The high achiever's instinct is to choose difficulty over regret. They understand that obstacles do not exist to signal retreat. They exist to test commitment. If you are willing to withstand the test, you earn the reward. If you are not, you return to the familiar. Endurance does not require that you move quickly. It requires that you keep moving. Forward motion can be slow, uneven, or ungraceful. It can include setbacks, pauses, or recalibrations. What matters is that you remain in the game. Time favors those who stay. Many people misinterpret setbacks as the end, when in reality setbacks are part of the path. No worthwhile pursuit unfolds without friction. If it did, everyone would achieve everything they wanted. One of the most powerful shifts you can make is changing how you interpret difficulty. Most people view difficulty as a signal that something is wrong. High achievers view difficulty as a signal that something meaningful is happening. If it's supposed to be easy, it's probably not valuable. If it's valuable, it's probably not easy. This simple lens removes a great deal of confusion. When you expect obstacles, you are not surprised by them. And when you are not surprised, you do not panic. You adapt. Adaptation is central to outlasting obstacles. Endurance is not stubbornness. It is not the refusal to change. It is the refusal to quit while continually adjusting your approach. If something is not working, the high achiever changes strategy, not the mission. Many people do the opposite. They change missions constantly while keeping their strategies the same. They jump from goal to goal, hoping to find one that requires no adaptation. That goal does not exist. Another factor in outlasting obstacles is patience. In a world of instant gratification, patience has become rare, and rarity has become advantage. The person willing to wait longer, endure longer, and repeat longer, gains access to results that vanish from the impatient. Patience is not passive, it is active persistence. It means you keep showing up, even when the timeline stretches. It means you allow compounding to do its work. Finally, outlasting obstacles builds identity and confidence. Every time you endure something you once thought you couldn't, your self-belief expands. You realize that challenges do not diminish you. They reveal you. And once you realize you can outlast one obstacle, you learn you can outlast the next. Over time, endurance becomes part of who you are. You become someone who doesn't fold when life becomes inconvenient. Someone who sees difficulty and chooses not to retreat. Ask yourself, which obstacles in your life are temporary, but feel permanent simply because you haven't endured long enough? How different might your trajectory look if instead of quitting, you outlasted what was trying to push you out? History remembers those who stayed in the fight. The same principle applies to your own story. Chapter 12. Use feedback as fuel, not insult. One of the defining traits of high achievers is their relationship with feedback, where many people perceive feedback as criticism, attack, or insult. High achievers perceive it as information that can accelerate improvement. The difference between the two responses has nothing to do with intelligence and everything to do with mindset. When your ego interprets feedback as a threat, you defend yourself. When your ambition interprets feedback as fuel, you grow. Feedback is uncomfortable because it reveals gaps. It exposes blind spots. It highlights what you need to improve, and improvement demands humility. Many people avoid feedback not because they dislike learning, but because they dislike confronting evidence that contradicts their self-image. It feels safer to protect pride than to refine skill. But pride protects weakness, and protected weakness cannot grow. High achievers would rather face an uncomfortable truth than remain comfortable in ignorance. There are two major types of feedback: voluntary and involuntary. Voluntary feedback is sought out. You ask for critique, guidance, or evaluation. Involuntary feedback is received, whether you want it or not. Life provides it through results, outcomes, failures, or missed opportunities. A person who refuses voluntary feedback will eventually be forced to accept involuntary feedback. One is proactive, the other reactive. One builds skill, the other delivers consequences. Another distinction worth noting is that feedback is not the same as judgment. Judgment is personal, feedback is directional. Judgment attacks you, feedback informs you. But because human beings tend to blend identity with performance, feedback often feels personal, even when it isn't. The ability to separate the two, your identity as a human being and your performance in a given task, is one of the most important psychological shifts for mastery. When you separate identity from performance, you become teachable. To use feedback as fuel, you must change the questions you ask. The average person asks, "What does this feedback say about me?" The high achiever asks, "What can I do with this information?" The first question leads to defensiveness. The second leads to action. Defensive thinking ends learning. Actionable thinking begins it. Not all feedback is equally valuable. High achievers are selective about their sources. They do not accept feedback from people who have no experience, no expertise, or no understanding of the domain. They do not recalibrate their path based on the opinions of people who are not walking that path. They listen to mentors, practitioners, performers, coaches, and data. They listen to those who have done the work and understand the terrain. Filtering feedback is just as important as accepting it. It is also useful to recognize that feedback often arrives before skill. When you begin something new, your performance will be rough. This is unavoidable. Feedback during this stage is especially valuable because it shapes the foundation. Yet this is also when people are most fragile and most likely to quit. They expect early competence and mistake early incompetence for inability. High achievers expect early incompetence and treat it as part of the journey. They understand that proficiency is earned, not granted. Feedback becomes fuel when it is paired with repetition. Hearing what to improve is not enough. You must apply it repeatedly until the improvement manifests. Many people listen to feedback once and never return to it. They nod, agree, and then resume their habits unchanged. High achievers close the loop. They gather feedback, make adjustments, test the adjustments, and gather new feedback. This iterative cycle is how mastery accelerates. There is also a silent form of feedback worth acknowledging: outcomes. Results are the purest form of feedback because they cannot be negotiated. They reveal the truth without emotion. If your actions produce the outcome you desire, the strategy is validated. If they do not, adjustment is required. Data is not judgment, it is measurement. High achievers study their outcomes like scientists. They do not take failure personally, they take it seriously. Finally, using feedback as fuel builds confidence in the long term. At first it may feel uncomfortable to expose your weaknesses, but as you improve, you begin to trust yourself. You develop a deep knowing that you can learn anything, adapt to anything, and grow through anything. Confidence built on evidence is sustainable. It does not require external validation because it is internal and earned. Ask yourself, how much have you avoided growth simply because you feared feedback? What opportunities have been missed because the ego demanded comfort? And how would your life change if feedback stopped threatening you and began strengthening you? When you stop using feedback as a mirror of inadequacy and start using it as a map for improvement, you unlock one of the greatest advantages available to anyone aspiring to excellence. Chapter 13. Surround yourself with high standards. Your environment is not neutral. It is either lifting you up or pulling you down. It is either expanding your potential or shrinking it. Many people underestimate the influence their surroundings have on their mindset, behavior, and outcomes. They believe they are independent agents who make choices freely, unaware that their environment shapes the very range of choices they consider. High achievers do not leave their environment to chance. They surround themselves with people, inputs and standards that reinforce the life they are trying to build. Standards are contagious. Spend enough time with disciplined people, and you begin to adopt discipline as normal. Spend enough time with ambitious people, and ambition becomes expected. Spend enough time with complacent people, and complacency becomes comfortable. The human mind adjusts to the dominant temperature of its environment. If you want to raise your internal temperature, you must raise the temperature around you. This is not about elitism or dismissing others. It is about recognizing that proximity influences performance. If you are the most driven person in your circle is limiting you. If you are the most knowledgeable person in your environment is no longer challenging you. Growth slows down when you stop being pushed. High achievers intentionally place themselves in environments that stretch them. They seek mentors who demand more, peers who operate at high levels, and standards that make mediocrity uncomfortable. One of the most subtle forms of influence is expectation. Expectations operate quietly, but powerfully. If the people around you expect little from themselves, they will expect little from you. They may not say it out loud, but the expectation is implied. Do not try too hard. Do not go too far. Do not rise too quickly. Do not make us uncomfortable. Social environments often punish ambition because ambition disrupts the status quo. High achievers experience this early in their journey. Friends or colleagues questioning why they are working so hard, why they are changing their habits, why they are prioritizing improvement. These questions are not always malicious. They are a defense mechanism. When you raise your standards, you unintentionally challenge the standards of those around you. This is why alignment matters. Aligning yourself with people who value growth, discipline, responsibility, and achievement creates a reinforcing loop. You no longer have to justify your ambition. You no longer have to explain your sacrifices. In a high-standard environment, effort is not questioned. It is respected. Improvement is not strange. It is normal. Excellence is not celebrated occasionally. It is expected, consistently. It is equally important to curate the inputs you consume. Your mental environment includes what you read, watch, listen to, and engage with. Digital platforms can either pollute your mind with distraction or feed it with insight. If your inputs are shallow, reactive, and fragmented, your thinking will become shallow, reactive, and fragmented. High achievers feed their minds with depth. They study ideas, learn from models, analyze patterns, and expose themselves to information that strengthens their character and sharpens their decision-making. Curating your digital diet is as important as curating your social circle. Another environmental factor is accountability. Accountability raises standards because it connects behavior to consequence. When you operate alone, you can justify anything. You can rationalize laziness, procrastination, or inconsistency without challenge. But when you are accountable to a group, a partner, a mentor, or even a public commitment, excuses lose power. High achievers leverage accountability because they understand how easily the mind can create loopholes. Accountability keeps those loopholes closed. There is also the matter of emotional environment. Your emotional environment includes how people around you handle adversity, stress, conflict, and failure. If you are surrounded by individuals who crumble under pressure or avoid responsibility, you will absorb that pattern. If you are surrounded by individuals who adapt, learn, and persist, you will absorb that instead. We mimic the coping mechanisms of our surroundings more than we realize. Finally, surrounding yourself with high standards alters your identity. It reshapes how you see yourself. When the environment expects more from you, you begin to expect more from yourself. When excellence becomes normal, instead of exceptional, your baseline rises. You no longer celebrate minimal effort, because minimal effort no longer satisfies you. This shift is subtle, but transformative. It turns ambition from something you chase into something you embody. Ask yourself, who around you challenges you to grow? Who around you reinforces excuses? What environments elevate your standards, and which environments lower them? Changing your environment is not always easy, but it is often more powerful than trying to change yourself while staying in an environment that contradicts your goals. High achievers choose surroundings that make growth inevitable. Chapter 14. Invest in your mind, like an asset. In the marketplace of life, your mind is the most valuable asset you will ever own. It is more valuable than money, more valuable than talent, and more valuable than opportunity. Money can be lost and rebuilt. Opportunity can be created or discovered. Talent can be developed over time. But the mind is the tool that determines how effectively you use every other resource. High achievers understand this and invest in their mind deliberately, consistently, and strategically. Most people assume investment refers only to finances. They spend their money carefully, but spend their attention recklessly. They protect their possessions but leave their thoughts unguarded. They save for retirement but starve their mind of information, insight, and challenge. Yet, the returns of mental investment dwarf the returns of financial investment. A single idea, skill, or perspective can alter the course of a career, unlock new levels of income, or solve problems that once seemed impossible. Investing in the mind begins with learning, not passive learning, but active learning. Learning that changes how you think and behave. Active learning involves reading, studying, practicing, reflecting, and applying. High achievers do not read for entertainment. They read for transformation. They read to acquire models of thinking, frameworks for decision-making, and strategies that compress decades of insight into hours. Books allow you to borrow wisdom from people who have spent years solving problems you will encounter. Few investments offer such leverage, but learning is not limited to books. Conversations with experienced individuals can be just as valuable. Exposure to new environments broadens perspective. Courses, mentorship, and skill building accelerate growth. Reflection deepens understanding, and practice cements knowledge into capability. The point is not the medium but the outcome. Does the input strengthen the mind? The opposite of investment is mental decay. Mental decay occurs when the mind is neglected, overstimulated with trivial information, or consumed by distraction. In the modern world, distraction is a form of mental debt. Every hour spent scrolling through fragmentary content is an hour not invested in building perspective or skill. The mind becomes reactive instead of reflective. It becomes conditioned for novelty instead of depth. High achievers resist this pattern. They choose depth over noise, understanding over entertainment, and intention over randomness. Another layer of mental investment is skill acquisition. Skills compound over time and multiply your earning potential, creative potential, and strategic advantage. Learning a skill today may seem slow, but 10 years later, it becomes effortless leverage. The world rewards those who can do rare and valuable things, and rarity is built through focus, practice, and patience. High achievers continuously ask themselves, what skills are worth acquiring? Which skills will matter 5 years from now? Where can I gain an advantage others overlook? Critical thinking is another form of mental investment. The ability to analyze information, identify patterns, question assumptions, and make sound decisions is a superpower in a world that rewards speed over accuracy. Critical thinking is not innate. It is developed through exposure to complex ideas, reflection, and problem solving. People who cannot think clearly are easily manipulated, easily overwhelmed, and easily discouraged. People who can think clearly move through life with confidence and stability. Investing in the mind also involves protecting it. A strong mind is not created solely by adding information. It is also created by subtracting toxicity, pessimism, and mental clutter. The conversations you engage in, the media you consume, and the narratives you internalize all influence your mental architecture. If you allow negativity to occupy your mental space, it becomes the lens through which you interpret the world. High achievers curate their mental diet. They choose inputs that elevate, not inputs that degrade. Another important aspect is curiosity. Curiosity keeps the mind alive. It pushes you to explore, seek, and question. Curiosity leads to innovation, creativity, and resourcefulness. When curiosity fades, the mind becomes rigid. It recycles old solutions for new problems and resists adaptation. High achievers do not let curiosity die with age or comfort. They treat curiosity as a habit that must be kept active. Finally, mental investment changes identity. When you invest in your mind, you begin to see yourself as someone capable of growth, capable of mastery, capable of contribution. This expands your sense of agency, the belief that you can influence your reality rather than merely react to it. Agency is what separates those who build life from those who endure it. A strong mind produces strong choices, and strong choices shape strong futures. Ask yourself, how much time do you invest in strengthening the mind that navigates your life? What would change if you treated your mind not as a container for memories, but as an asset designed for performance? The mind you build becomes the life you live. Investing in it is not optional for those who seek excellence. It is a requirement. Chapter 15. Reinvent yourself as often as needed. One of the greatest advantages you possess as a human being is the ability to reinvent yourself. You are not required to remain who you have been. You are not obligated to repeat old patterns, sustain outdated beliefs, or perform former versions of yourself just because others have grown comfortable with them. Reinvention is not about abandoning your identity. It is about updating it to match the future you intend to build. High achievers understand that growth requires periodic reinvention, and that the person they must become next is not always compatible with who they are now. Reinvention begins with honesty. Most people cling to their current identity because it feels safe, familiar, and socially validated. They tell themselves, this is just how I am, or this is who I've always been, or people know me for this. But these statements are not truths. They are protections. They protect you from uncertainty, from expectation, and from the courage required to evolve. Reinvention requires the humility to ask, is the version of me that exists today capable of producing the future I desire? If the answer is no, then evolution becomes necessary. Part of the challenge is that reinvention disrupts your environment. People tend to prefer consistency in others because it allows them to predict how to interact. When you reinvent yourself, you alter that predictability. You may find that some people support your evolution while others resist it, not because they dislike you, but because your growth threatens their comfort. When you raise your standards, you implicitly pressure others to confront their own choices. Reinvention can feel lonely at first, but loneliness is often the bridge between who you were and who you are becoming. Another difficulty lies in the emotional cost of reinvention. Reinvention requires letting go of habits, beliefs, relationships, environments, or identities that no longer serve your future. This letting go often triggers grief, even when the change is positive. You are leaving behind a version of yourself you once cared about. High achievers accept this grief as part of evolution. They do not romanticize older versions of themselves simply because they are familiar. They honor those versions, but they do not remain confined by them. Reinvention also requires experimentation. You cannot think your way into a new identity. You must act your way into one. The brain updates its self-concept based on evidence. If you want to become a disciplined person, you must behave as one. If you want to become a leader, you must begin leading. If you want to become a creator, you must create. Identity follows action, not the other way around. Waiting to feel like the new version before acting like the new version keeps reinvention permanently out of reach. Another important truth is that reinvention is not always dramatic. It does not require burning everything down, quitting your job overnight, or disappearing into a new city. Reinvention is often incremental. It is built in quiet decisions, steady habits, and accumulated changes that eventually transform how you think and operate. The small improvements that seem insignificant in the moment often become the defining shifts of the future. Timing also plays a role. Reinvention requires recognizing the difference between persistence and stagnation. Persistence means continuing on a path because it still leads somewhere meaningful. Stagnation means continuing on a path because it is familiar, even though it no longer leads anywhere. The difference is subtle but critical. High achievers periodically audit their direction. They ask whether they are still building toward a compelling future or merely maintaining a comfortable past. Reinvention does not guarantee ease. In fact, it often demands courage, discomfort, and resilience. But the alternative, being locked into a static identity, is far more costly. Life changes, industries change, opportunities change, environments change. If you refuse to change with them, you do not preserve your identity. You fossilize it. Reinvention keeps you adaptable. Adaptability keeps you relevant. Relevance keeps you effective. Ultimately, reinvention expands what is possible for you. Each time you upgrade your identity, you expand your capabilities, your confidence, and your options. You stop living as a character in someone else's expectations and begin living as the author of your own trajectory. That shift alone transforms everything. How you work, how you think, how you choose, and how you engage with your future. Ask yourself, what version of yourself have you outgrown? What beliefs, habits, or identities once served you but no longer do? And more importantly, who do you need to become next in order to live the life you say you want? Reinvention is not reserved for the extraordinary. It is available to anyone willing to evolve. The only question is whether you will allow your future to be built by your potential or restricted by your past. Conclusion. Achievement is not an accident, and it is not a mystery. It is the logical result of a mindset shaped by intention, discipline, clarity, resilience, and personal responsibility. High achievers are not different because the world gave them special conditions. They are different because they built the internal conditions required to meet the world with strength. They decided who they would become. They designed their direction. They raised their standards. They embraced discomfort. They defended their focus. And they completed what they started. These are not small adjustments. They are transformations of the mind. As you reflect on the ideas within this audiobook, understand that nothing here requires perfection. You are not expected to embody every lesson flawlessly or instantly. What matters is adoption and direction. A single shift, one new standard, one consistent habit, one clarified vision can alter your trajectory. The mind changes gradually and then suddenly. Much of improvement is invisible until it becomes undeniable. Most breakthroughs are earned long before they are experienced. You also carry something essential with you: agency. The ability to choose, the ability to update your identity, the ability to invest in your mind, the ability to design instead of drift, the ability to reinvent instead of repeat. These abilities are available to you at any moment, regardless of your past or your current circumstances. High achievers are not merely people with ambition. They are people who refuse to outsource their lives to chance, excuses, or passive expectation. They participate fully in the creation of their future. As you move forward, remember that the journey of achievement is not linear. There will be setbacks, recalibrations, and seasons of slow progress. But slow progress is still progress. Obstacles are not signals to withdraw. They are invitations to strengthen. Feedback is not a threat, it is a mirror. Discomfort is not punishment, it is the price of growth. And time is not something to endure, it is something to weaponize. Ultimately, the high achiever mindset is not about external success alone. It is about becoming a person capable of success. A person who honors their commitments, a person who finishes what they begin, a person who protects their standards, invests in their mind, and adapts to change. A person whose future is shaped intentionally, not accidentally. Achievement is less about the trophies and more about the transformation required to earn them. So the final question is not, what do you want, but rather, who will you become in order to achieve it? Because you become what you think, and you move toward what you decide. If you choose to think like a high achiever and act accordingly, the results will eventually reflect that choice. The mind builds the life, one commitment, one decision, and one evolution.